Yo, 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 what's good, YouTube? This is Stormy B-Man, and I am back. Welcome to another edition of the Three Wise Men of Boxing for this Thursday evening, our new time. This is April 16th, 2020. Hope that everybody is having a wonderful week as we are coming to you with our regular show, but on a new night at a new time. And hope that you are primed and ready to tune in for this edition where we are featuring intimidating fighters. And as I go forward, I want to introduce my brothers on the panel with me. Brother Scrapbook Boxing, how you doing, Scrap? Doing just fine and blessed, man. Just fine and blessed, bro. How you doing, Kurt? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Glad to have you, man, and hoping for a full, speedy recovery for you, man. I know it's a tough grind, but, man, you got the love and support of the brothers and sisters out here in the community, man, and we just hoping the best for you to get on back on track because we got a lot of boxing to talk, man. This evening, I am so excited for us to get started where we are featuring intimidating fighters in the sport of boxing, man. How about you guys? Hold tight, fellas. Hold 1 second. I am not hearing you guys in the playback of the audio.
You got me now, Stormy?
Not over the air. I'm hearing you on here, but I'm not hearing you over the air.
Can you hear me over the air, Stormy?
I'm waiting to see because it's like, hold on. Let's see now. Okay, you guys say something now because I'm making an audio adjustment here.
Check 1, 2. Can you hear me over the air?
Let's
Check
see.
1, 2. You got me, Stormy?
They're saying that you guys are low, but I can hear you. Okay, say something now.
Check 1, 2. Can you hear me? Check. Can you hear me? Check 1, 2. How about me? You got me?
Okay, yeah, got you clear now, Kurt, because you know the audio is on a little bit of a delay, so I have to wait. Once you say something, I have to give it a few seconds. But we're good to go now. Yes, we are good. We are good.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
We're good to go now. So you can go ahead with what you were saying, brother.
How does one become intimidated? What makes someone intimidating? And that's the question. There are plenty of fighters throughout history that oppose physically, but not so much mentally. And that's what we have to determine when they're bringing out these opponents of certain fighters who we believe are intimidating.
Yes, indeed. Let me piggyback off that. An intimidating fighter usually starts, the criteria is punching power, a la George Foreman, Ernie Shavers, Mike Tyson. And then the look. Marvin Hagler with the bald head, Ernie Shavers with the bald head. You know, their physical appearance. You know, George Foreman with the muscles, Mike Weaver, you know, Ken Norton, somebody like that. Then you have reputation. You know, the reputation being in the gym and you know the fans talking about you, like Mike Tyson had a fierce reputation, Sonny Liston, of a mean guy that used to fight the cops. So you know that's the criteria of an intimidating fighter: the look, the punching power, is reputation. You know, all rolled up into one that makes for an intimidating fighter in boxing.
Awesome. What about IQ or aura of invincibility? Will we include that as intimidation as well?
You could be intimidated by a fighter's ring IQ, like a Mayweather or Leonard or Ali. You know, you can. You know, the intellect of a fighter. Yes, absolutely. But when that word intimidating exudes strength and power. You know, but you know, you can't put in ring IQ, but usually it's the power of a fighter, the raw punching power that when you hear the word intimidating goes with that. Like I said, like a Ernie Shavers or George Foreman or a Sonny Liston, you can be intimidating by your skill set, like Terrence Bud Crawford. You know, he has a reputation as being one of the best fighters in the world, if not the best fighter in the world. But it's usually power and intimidating. That word is synonymous with each other.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
I agree with that, and I'd like to add something to it. It's kind of along the lines also of what Mike Tyson once said in one of his press conferences. He was saying when they were asked about someone being fearful of him and being intimidated, he said, well, you don't intimidate anybody by like talking or what you say. He said you can intimidate them by what you do to them. So that is something. And also psychologically getting in someone's head what you could possibly do to them, you know. But as fighters, they know that they are in the hurt business. So what is it that very fine thing that will allow a fighter to have another fighter intimidate him? It has to be something that is within that individual. It doesn't have to be the same for every other fighter. It could be something in particular. Some fighters who were champions and allowed themselves to be intimidated by an opponent. For an example, I like to use Michael Spinks when he faced Mike Tyson. You know, Spinks had been a light heavyweight champion, and his specialty punch, the Spinks Jinx, that right hand that he had, and he fought some tremendous fighters at light heavyweight and moved up and beat Larry Holmes. So it's like, what would intimidate Michael Spinks when it came down to Mike Tyson, who was not a big heavyweight, by the way, you know, at 5'10" and a half and 215 pounds, you know, kind of stocky build and everything, a little bit bigger than Dwight Muhammad Qawi that he fought, who had long arms like a 6-footer, even though he was short like Tyson, but, or shorter than Tyson. Spinks allowed himself to be intimidated, but I think it was the aura. I don't even think it was the power. I think it was just that aura that Mike brought at that time and the success he had by putting a lot of guys out. For whatever reason, Michael allowed that to intimidate him. What do you think it is with fighters, Kurt, that poses to them being professionals that is tantamount of a fighter being intimidating?
Well, when you say aura, the power brings the aura. You know, when you look at power punchers in boxing, you know, they have a certain type of sinister reputation. And then what happens, that reputation builds into a certain type of aura. You know, it's twisted up and it all works together. You know, you see a guy that's coming up that's knocking everybody out. So people begin to talk about him. And then the fans begin to talk about him. That's his power. Then is the reputation. You know, you heard about this guy is this and that, and his name is starting to get out there. Then after the reputation comes the aura. His aura begins to build as he's knocking out people and as he's moving up in ranks. That's what happened to Mike Tyson. You know, his name caught fire, and then he started knocking out people on television. So his reputation got big, but people know about Tyson, like coaches and other fighters and the amateurs are having power, but the mainstream didn't know. Once the mainstream catches on, your aura is going to get big. You see, everything works hand in hand. And see, that what builds, you know, an intimidating fighter. Because once people start saying, this guy doesn't believe in the fill-out round, you know, he's the master of the 90-second knockout. Once you go out there and start knocking people out in the first round, your aura is going to be through the roof. And that's what happened. And that's why Mike Tyson became a polarizing figure, you know, because his aura was so large, man, you can cut it with a knife. So all of that power, reputation, aura works in that fashion, you know, and the rest we say is history, you know, and Mike Tyson and Sonny Liston and Ernie Shavers, man, they were so intimidating that you had to be strong-willed. But the way boxing is, you know what beats intimidating fighter? A fighter with a high skill set. Because when you look at history, all those guys who punches hard, Joe Louis, Jack Dempsey, Julio Cesar Chavez, Roberto Duran, Sonny Liston, they all lost to fighters who had a better skill set. So at the end of the day, even though we talk about intimidating fighters, one thing trumps intimidating fighters, and that's skill set. Because intimidating fighters by nature, they depend on their power. And you're not going to knock everybody out. You know, so that will work on a lesser man, character-wise. Coming to the fight, there was a fighter from New Orleans named Johnny Duplessis, who was not a bad fighter. And he was fighting Julio Cesar Chavez. He was scared of Chavez's reputation because Chavez wasn't a one-punch knockout artist. He would wear you down. But his name was so big and he became legendary by wearing people down that Johnny Duplessis became intimidated. And he was so scared in that fight, I was yelling at the TV. But those are just a couple of things that I had to get off my chest about intimidating factors, how it can help a fighter and how it can hurt a fighter.
Come on in. What you got on that, Scrap?
Yeah, one of the things I know about mankind is your demonstration. When you demonstrate something, that will reflect on your reputation. And when you have a good reputation, that can cause someone to actually look at you and become intimidated. So demonstration will create reputation. Reputation will create intimidation. And it's a matter of what you do at that point to the person or the thing in front of you that will cause everyone else around you to take a second look at you. That's why the old theory of you find the toughest guy in the room, and that demonstrates your character, how you handle the toughest situation or circumstance in the room. When you see that done often enough, you will become intimidated because the little person inside of you won't come out to play. And that's basically the bottom line. Most guys with the tough guys who do all of the weights or whatever the case is, they're doing that because they're trying to disguise a little boy that's inside hiding. So when you get rid of that portion of him, he has nothing left. And that's why a lot of these guys are intimidated, because naturally you're not supposed to be intimidated of anything. You're only born with two fears, the fear of falling and the fear of a loud sound. Everything else you learn. So if you're afraid of another man, it's because of what you're lacking on the inside based on what he demonstrated. So that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of intimidation. Now, Mike Tyson, we were talking about Mike Tyson before. Mike Tyson has an aura of invincibility. What do I mean by that? His presence in the room, it's just that way. You have some people once or twice in a lifetime that just have that. And you see them, and regardless of how tough you are on the inside, it's something about that situation and or circumstance that shows you that you're going to have a problem. Mike Tyson displayed that just by walking in the room. He didn't have to say anything. And you have people that you know in life that are like that, whether they're business workers or they're in physical jobs. But he's intimidating in that way because you know he's capable of doing something without your control because of the kind of person he is. So that's why I think a lot of the guys that Mike Tyson had to face were afraid of him because they know that Mike Tyson didn't give a damn. He didn't care. He had something that he was trying to display. But if they really knew about a Mike Tyson, they would know all you have to do is fight Mike Tyson. And then the little boy that he's trying to hide will come out and play. And that little boy cannot cope with society. And that's just an idea of what intimidation does to you.
You went there with the little boy. I got you on that one, man. It's funny because that's what you're relegated back to when you when your inner fears, your demons are brought before you, and a person can crystallize that for you, and that's how they begin to pick you apart. It's really a psychological play. The more that you're able to suppress those things and manifest that gives you life or strength or whatever, and increase that, you can suppress that other side. But there in boxing, we see it happen where there are fighters out there who are masters of stripping someone of their strengths. And those are usually the most successful fighters who have gone on long runs, champions who have reigned for years and multiple defenses because they understand what it takes to get there. They know what it takes to remain there and remain successful. And then they also know what it takes to fend off, those various adversities that could come their way during title reigns. Through our collages that I'm putting together here, I'm putting together some of the most fearsome fighters who have been in boxing, and it's no particular weight class. It's just multiple faces and names that we have known through the history of the sport. And like what we have currently on the page, we've got guys like Jack Dempsey on here, Ernie Shavers, Bernard Hopkins, Edmund Rosario. Feel free, brothers, to chime in on any of the faces or names that you see, that you can even remark what made them intimidating, what was a part of their success with intimidation as they went through their careers.
Well, I'm going to say Ernie Shavers. Ernie Shavers was a menacing looking guy. You didn't have many people that was bald headed at that time, which was a menacing look. And his reputation as just having raw power, because look at film and you're looking at him knocking people through the ropes and knocking people's heads off and knocking people every which way. If you're not strong mentally, you're going to fall victim into being intimidated, and you're going to start to doubt yourself. And see, that's what starts everything. You can't win because you fear his punching power, because you don't have enough willpower or character or intestinal fortitude to not think about his power, but go in there and just fight. And it's not easy, because it takes a certain type of man, let alone boxer, to ignore his punching power, because you may get hit with something and they may not be that hard, but in your mind it's hard because you're thinking about all the guys he done knocked out before you. You know, but that's not Ernie Shaver's fault or Mike Tyson's fault. But I want to say this too before I pass the mic, that boxing is a strange sport because all those guys we mentioned, Sonny Liston quit on the stool, Roberto Duran quit in one of the biggest rematches in boxing history, Mike Tyson quit by biting somebody on the ear, George Foreman was bedazzled in Africa. You know, his spirits was broken. Felix Trinidad's spirits was broken. Julio Cesar Chavez Sr.'s spirits was broken. And my point being, even though you may be intimidating, and like I alluded to before, when your power doesn't work or doesn't figure into the equation, just like my brother Scrap said, the little boy comes out. I want to take my football and go home. Because I'd rather have a fighter who has a super skill set than a fighter who knocks people out. It's exciting, and as humans, we gravitate towards that. And I'm just like everybody else. I love knockouts too. But when that fighter go into the ring, say, I'm going to knock this guy out, I'm going to knock this man out, and it doesn't work, the little boy come out. And we just seen that recently when the little boy came out and started having excuses. So that's my take on the intimidating fighter. Cons and the pros.
Perfect. I mean, that's a great example. And to follow up on one thing that Curtis had said. Curtis, you said something a long time ago, and it resonates with this conversation. You said fighters are the biggest liars. They have to be. And that is 100% correct. I couldn't have said it better than myself. Fighters have to be liars. See, when you look at a man as if he were what he could be, then that man does not become what he should be. Why? Because that man is a ploy. What he's giving you, he's trying to sell you something. He's trying to sell you a facade because he doesn't have the goods to deliver to you. But he knows that you're willing to buy something. It's just a matter of what it is that you're willing to buy. So he's going to pick and see what it is that you're willing to pay for. And that's all it is. It's a facade because we're all human beings. I'm looking at Jack Dempsey. No one has seen anybody like Jack Dempsey from 1915 to 1919. When he fought Jess Willard, he gave Jess Willard one of the biggest beatings in boxing history. And that feared everybody because they never seen anything like that before. Mike Tyson, when he came out in 1985 against Hector Mercedes, the same thing. Those who didn't follow him in the amateurs, they saw what he was all about as a professional in 1985. We look at Roberto Duran. He had that menacing look with the beard. But inside with Roberto Duran, if you somewhat gave him an uncomfortable circumstance or situation, he was very uncomfortable. George Foreman, the same way. He didn't have a plan B. Most bullies don't have plan Bs because they don't believe they're going to be hit back, as the boxing phrase. If you look at Julio Cesar Chavez, as soon as he got cut, he quit. He didn't have a plan B because inside he's always used to taking advantage of people. But when he had to stop and figure something out, he couldn't do it. And that's what most of the intimidating fighters or factors are based on. They're based on what can I do the first time around to solve the problem. And that's what's been happening in boxing history and in life in general.
Some of these fighters that we have were very versed in displaying their intimidation. Some of them to a degree that it became a great part of their success, of course, but also folklore. The the fact that Kurt mentioned several of our most intimidating fighters, some who are definitely pictured, with their cloaks being stripped from them and them wanting to take their football and go home. That's a great metaphor. But I want to also speak on the fact of having the kind of stuff that would allow you to be intimidating. You know, because you can't take some guy that's like a skinny 90-pound weakling in appearance and make him an intimidating force without something else happening to go with it to give you a contrast to what that's supposed to mean. The 90-pound weakling, but people are afraid of him. What is it about that aspect of the fighter that can become what we're talking about? One of the fighters that I have here on this current collage here is in the top center there. That's Alexis Arguello. Alexis Arguello didn't look like a mean guy. You know, he didn't look like a guy that would beat you up or whatever. But my goodness, when he landed that right hand, funny things happen to people, right? Scrapbook, can you tell us a little bit more about someone like that?
Yeah, absolutely. When you can't solve the problem, you can't solve the puzzle, that will intimidate you because it's going to exploit your weaknesses. When you look at Alexis Arguello, he was frail, but he had a beautiful jab. He had a beautiful straight right hand. He knew exactly what he was doing. That's why I asked about IQ. Because IQ is very intimidating as well, in my opinion. Because if I ask you a question and you can answer the question and you ask me a question back based on the same question I asked you and I can't answer it, I'm now intimidated to ask you another question. And that's just the way it is. Roberto Duran his IQ wasn't like Alexis Arguello. Alexis Arguello had a beautiful IQ because he can read you between the lines. His issue was he couldn't take pressure. That was his problem. But you get a small man like Alexis Arguello, he could be intimidating if you can't solve his puzzle. And most fighters couldn't.
You still there, Scrap?
Absolutely.
No, I'm here. Yeah, I passed it off.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Kurt. You got something on it?
Yeah, skinny guys can be intimidating when they have awesome punching power. Sandy Saddler, Bob Foster, Tommy Hearns. You know, when Tommy Hearns was a welterweight, he was 32-0 with 30 knockouts. And this dude was scary. When he knocked out Pepino Cuevas, it's not how many knockouts, it's who you knock out. Because people talk about Cuevas versus Leonard. And when Tommy Hearns knocked out Cuevas, it's the way he knocked him out that caught the boxing world's attention. In the Leonard camp, they deferred that fight for at least a year. It wasn't Leonard, it was Dundee. You know, and Bob Foster's another one when he knocked out Dick Tiger. You know, skinny guys can be intimidating. Gerald McClellan is another one, along with Alexis Arguello, because a knockout is a psychological thing where people see people fall in the ring over and over again. The same guy is knocking this guy out, knocking that guy out. So your eyes telling your brain, do you see what we up against? You can't get hit with that punch. And certain fighters, they go into a training camp working on avoiding a certain punch. That's intimidation. I can't, and they still get hit with it. And you go in training camp working on a defensive maneuver or technique so you won't get hit with that punch. That's an intimidating factor because you're basing a big part of your training camp on avoiding certain punches because it's in the back of your head that you don't want to get hit with that punch. Boxing is really, really 70% mental, man. And That's the pros. To have people second and third guessing. The con is if you land a punch that you're used to seeing people fall and they don't, most of those fighters don't have a plan B. And their spirits become broken. You know, they lose confidence. Just look at Trinidad Face. It's another guy that's thin that can punch. Just look at Trinidad Face before he got knocked out by Bernard Hopkins. What Jim Lampley said. When they was in the clinch and the bell rung, and Jim Lampley said, I seen a look on Trinidad Face that I never seen before. Because his spirit was broken. That's the worst thing in boxing. Because you believe that you can't win. So that's the pros and cons of an intimidating fighter with power.
Now that's the whole thing right there. Perfect, Curtis. Perfect. Because what that does is segues to what I've always mentioned on a lot of the conversations we've had. You have to have 4 dimensions in order to make you a complete fighter, because all this bases around who you actually are as an individual. You need leadership, principle, work ethics, and self-esteem. And in order for you to tie that all together and not fall off of one of those dimensions, you have to have spirituality. You got to believe in something higher than you, because you're going to be put in a place one time. You're going to be taken to a location that it's not in the textbook. There's no way you can go and research how to solve this problem. But your inner energy, who you really are, what you're really made of, that's what you have to rely on. So if you don't have anything on the inside that you believe in that's higher than you, that's when these problems will start to really get to you. You'll start having these kind of problems. And you have a lot of fighters that will impose that just based on who they are. And they can look at you and see, oh, okay, I know what to do with this guy. They think. So you can be a smaller man, but you can be bigger on the inside. And that bigger man who has something less on the inside will be exposed. And that's why a lot of people are intimidated, because they know that there's something inside that they don't want exposed. And they see that you're getting to them, so they back off. Because the worst thing a person wants is to be exposed. They came a long way, built their whole life around trying to come up with some kind of facade, build up their character, get you to believe that they're more than what they are. And here you come and expose it. So they want to defend that. And that's why a lot of people are afraid. That's why a lot of people try to move around circumstances that can expose who they really are. But you got fighters out there that don't care. Joe Frazier, our early Mike Tyson. You had fighters like Alexis Aguayo, Joe Louis. There are a lot of great fighters that didn't care. And if you beat them, they had to come back and fight you again, because it was the hard. Matthew Saad Muhammad. We can mention a lot of fighters. But it's all about the testament of a man, what he really has on the inside. That's really the bottom line, in my opinion.
Joe Frazier was the quintessential intimidating force in there with the way he went about his business in boxing. Prior to his loss to George Foreman, there were people who felt like, Joe Frazier was the business. And he even conquered Muhammad Ali, So as you looked at what he did, he was up close and personal, meaning in invading your personal space when you fought him in the ring. He didn't give you any breathing room. He didn't give you any chance to catch your breath. He was on top of you like that everlasting wave that comes for surfers out there on the ocean. It's like Joe just brought it, and he had an indomitable will. He just had that nature about himself, and you could see the wreckage that he would leave in the wake of his conquest. Joe brought a bit of that workmanlike. You hear that term used in boxing before, but that's what he would do. And one of his famous sayings was, I just wanted to get the job done. And that was Joe Frazier. He looked at it like a job, a task that had been placed before him. Go take care of this, Joe. And that's what he did. The quintessential pit bull, in your face, but he did it artistically because he had boxing ability. You know, Joe was in the Olympics, you know, a gold medalist. You know, it wasn't like he was just some mauler and guy that just come and try to paw you to death. There was some skill behind what he did, but he did it in a manner which, like, he carved out a place in history for himself. And there's a lot of respect for the man that he was. Even though he had Ali as a dance partner, the fact that Ali had such personality and could talk so much, it really overshadowed what Joe was capable of doing physically to you in the ring. And I think that Ali, even years after having fought Joe Frazier, felt Joe Frazier on top of him. You know what I'm saying? That's what I have to say about Joe and his intimidation. He not only intimidated you before he got to you, while he was in there with you, even possibly after he was done with you. What do you got to say about that, Kurt?
Yeah, Joe Frazier not only was an intimidating fighter, but he was an intimidating man. He didn't play no game. His whole mindset, he looked at what he did, like you said, as a task. He had to get the job done. He fought like, you know, it's strange how a fighter fight in the ring, how he lives outside the ring. And that was Joe Frazier. You know, always in shape, didn't care who he fought. He gets pummeled by George Foreman and then fights him again later on in his career. That just goes to show you what kind of fighter he was. You know, he's the first guy to beat Muhammad Ali. You know, Joe Frazier, great fighter, you know, but it's his fighting spirit. He brought that tenacity in the ring, you know, that you don't see anymore. You know, so that made Joe Frazier intimidating, not his size, but the left hook. When you think about Joe Frazier, the first thing come to mind is I got to avoid his left hook. You know, so that's one of the many things that we're talking about, that people, you know, get intimidated by a certain fighter. Just like Sonny Liston, when he fought Floyd Patterson, his own people, the NAACP didn't want Sonny Liston to win the title because they figured he was a thug. He's an intimidating guy out the ring as well in the ring. You know, so they didn't want him to become heavyweight champion. And they begged Floyd Patterson not to fight him. Now, Floyd might have been scared, but he fought him anyway. Floyd Patterson people didn't want Patterson to fight Liston, Customato, because Customato knew that Floyd did have no chance with Sonny Liston because he intimidated not Floyd Patterson, but he intimidated Customato. But Patterson kept saying, I got to fight him because he's the number one contender. Sonny Liston was going through everybody from top 10 contender to number one contender. And he earned it. And I commend Floyd Patterson because he could have ducked him, but he didn't. He understood as a fighter that I may be frightened of this man. I may or may not. People saying I can't win, but I have to fight him. And he did. And the results was he suffered a first round KO twice because of the reputation and the raw power, rightfully so, of one Sonny Liston.
What do you have, Scrap?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% with Curtis just said. A very good example. But when you go back to Joe Frazier and Evander Holyfield and fighters like that, they are spiritually bound. And what I mean by that is they work by faith and not by sight. They believe in, like you said, getting the job done. Evander Holyfield was the same way. You would have to beat him with a stick and beat him half to death in order to stop him. Because they believe the reason, their purpose for being at that moment is to get the job done. And no matter what has to happen in getting the job done, they're willing to sacrifice. And when you fight a fighter like that, that will intimidate you because you know unless you take this man out, you're in trouble. And that's the reason why you have fighters like Joe Frazier and Henry Armstrong and Evander Holyfield and Larry Holmes, Mike Tyson. Guys like that, you know it's going to take a lot in order for you to stop them because of what they have on the inside. And Joe Frazier was something else, man. I don't think I will ever see another fighter anytime soon. I don't see him yet. That has the heart, the dignity, and the spirituality of a Joe Frazier. Evander Holyfield reminds me of Joe Frazier in that way. Amazing humanitarians and fighters these men were.
And to mention Larry Holmes, you know, for a boxer in the sport of boxing, that like he was and the skill set that he had, for anyone out there that thinks that Larry Holmes wasn't like Joe Frazier on the inside or Evander Holyfield on the inside, being that ultimate warrior or whatever, you're sadly mistaken. Larry Holmes had that very same indomitable spirit that we talk about as a fighter, and he also accepted challenges. Knock him down, okay, he's going to get up and he's going to take you to school and he's going to stop you. He's going to knock you out. I remember he opened up a cut over the eye of who was that? Bone Crusher Smith. And as the fight went on, Bone's cornermen had kind of taken care of the cut, so it wasn't that bad. But in the later rounds of the fight, Bone opened up a cut over Larry Holmes' eye. And it was immediately after that Larry went to work on that cut on Bone. It seemed like he targeted it. He threw everything he had at it. It busted his cut open again, and he got a 12-round stoppage. It was like Larry was like, I'm still gonna one up you, sucker. You're not gonna do this to me. And that's the type of fighter he was. It defined his career. You know, he got dropped by Mike Weaver. He knocks Mike Weaver out with an uppercut. It's like Larry Holmes is, you know, a lot of people don't like him because he's an outspoken man. That's whether you're black folks, white folks, if you're media personalities or whatever, or even some of the people out here today, maybe even in the chat right now, they don't like Larry Holmes. But he was one of the best champions of all times. And it would be hard to duplicate what he brought to the ring as a fighter. And that was very intimidating because not only did he have guile, he had skills, he had ring IQ, he had experience, and the total overall package and ability to get the job done, as Frazier would say. That's a fighter that I could always defer to because there's nothing like that, even currently as we speak.
Well, absolutely. And that's the whole idea of what we're talking about right now. When you look at someone who fights under pressure, regardless of what they're feeling on the inside, when they actually explode under pressure, that's the mark of the individual. There's an old saying right now, keeping them honest. That's what you want to do. You want to keep the man honest because an honest man is a dangerous man. When you look at Larry Holmes, he was honest about what he said, what he spoke about, how he felt, and what he delivered. Ray Robinson, another one. Muhammad Ali, another one. Ali was very outspoken, but he was honest, and he showed it in the ring. There was no flashiness outside of his words. He was honest about what he said, what he meant, how he delivered his message. And either you got it or you didn't, because he was going to bring it to you. And that's how a lot of these great fighters became great, because they were honest. And when you keep a man honest, that man is dangerous.
Absolutely. See, when you talk about intimidating fighters, the conversation could go many ways. You know, you could talk about fighters that's polar opposite, that didn't have power, but had character, you know, intestinal fortitude. That's something that you can't teach. You gotta be born with it. You know, what Ali had and Leonard had and Mayweather had, and, you know, those guys, they could be any type of style. They can get hurt in a fight and recover in the same round. I just watched a fight today that I recommend this fight. That his name is Matthew Saad Muhammad. He fought a guy by the name of Richie Cates. And I want you guys to watch that fight where Richie Cates hit Matthew Saad Muhammad with a devastator right hand. And make the impact worse, Saad Muhammad ran into the right hand. Saad Muhammad fell face first on the canvas. Boom. But you know what? He got up. How did he get up? I would never know. That's something that you can't teach. Saying like Holmes and Shavers. And going back to the Saad Muhammad Richie Cates fight, Saad Muhammad got up. He was so wobbly. If that was today, they would have stopped it. But Saad Muhammad fought on. And don't you know, in the next round, the way Saad Muhammad got knocked down is the same way he caught Richie Cates. Straight right hand, Richie Cates ran into it. Boom. But the difference is, even though the fight lasted a couple more rounds, Richie Cates never recovered. And Saad Muhammad went on to knock him out. That's the intestinal fortitude. And the reason I'm bringing this up is we talk about intimidating fighters, but I took it in another direction as the polar opposites of an intimidating fighter, because you see fighters get knocked down and it seems to be a boxer. You see Muhammad Ali in dire straits come back from the jaws of defeat to get victory. Seen it with Mayweather and Mosley. Seen it with Leonard and Hearn. So it seems like the blue chipper fighter, the one that can fight many ways, is the fighter that you want to be. Now, the knockouts is great. The Tyson Shavers knockout is entertaining, but it just seems like the boxer, the so-called pretty boy, always have what it takes to overcome adversity.
Hey, I agree 100%, Curtis. Well put. Well put. You put a man to a test and see what he's made of. He's going to tell you right away. And it's a matter of whether you're willing to let him know what you're made of. That's the key. That's the bottom line. If you have confidence in yourself, belief in yourself, it's going to display itself at the most awkward moment in your life. You will not be intimidated if you believe in who you actually are. If you have any doubt about who you actually are, you will be intimidated. As they say, you don't stand up for something, you'll fall for anything. That's why I say over and over again, you got to have leadership, principle, work ethics, and self-esteem. And you have to tie it up with spirituality. Those are the 4 dimensions you have to walk around in life, let alone in a boxing ring. Because like I said once before, anything and everything will happen in a boxing ring. You're going to get a piece of hair, eyelash in your eye, while a man is throwing a 5-punch combination at you. What do? How do you solve that problem? The only way you're going to solve that problem, the true you will come out and take over. As for Matthew Saad Muhammad, as for Joe Frazier, as for Evander Holyfield in the 10th round, with Riddick Bowe, the first fight. There's going to be moments in everyone's life when they're going to be tested to the point when there's no textbook. You can't figure it out. It's either you have it or you do not. As far as being intimidated, if you have what it takes, and that's to believe in who you actually are, you will not be intimidated. You may not win, but you're not going to be intimidated because you believe in who you are. You know who you are. You got everything straightened out about who you are. And that's what happens with a lot of fighters. They don't have it together. So they become intimidated because they know that there's something about what's going to happen in the next few seconds that would exploit who I really am. And that's the problem. So we look at Jack Dempsey and Mike Tyson, Timothy Bradley, Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather. They all have demonstrated, they all shown what happens when you hurt me. How do I come back from that? That's very, very important. Because if you don't have that will inside of you, not only will you become intimidated, but you will demonstrate what you're really made of. And you'll be intimidated for the rest of your life.
Evander Holyfield, when being interviewed after his title loss to Riddick Bowe in their first fight, that classic fight between them, was asked about the 10th round where he got seriously hurt. He got dropped. He was being rocked from pillar to post. And he famously remarked, I got him where I want him. At that time, Riddick Bowe was pouring it on. Evander looked like he could get stopped. And here Evander is saying that he got Bowe where he want him. And the interviewer, I think it was Larry Merchant at that time, remarked like, wow, it's, what a statement for a fighter to make under those circumstances, under those conditions where it looked like he was an inch from being out, But that's the mark of a real fighter, a guy who's capable of digging down deeper than where he is, to recognize that at his point of vulnerability, he could still see the vulnerability in the other guy. That's a hell of a fighter. I wanted to also remind our panel, we had talked about speaking that today is the day after the anniversary of the fight between Marvin Hagler and Tommy Hearns. Guys, we had mentioned that yesterday.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Yesterday was the anniversary. So here it is. Was that 30 plus
35 years?
30, yeah.
35 years.
So, what a fight that took place between two of the sport's most intimidating guys for different reasons. Marvin Hagler and Thomas the Hitman Hearns. Scrapbook, tell us a little bit about Marvin and his intimidating factors that made him what he was as a fighter.
Marvin Hagler, just to touch on that fight with Thomas Hearns, he was beating his head during the national anthem. He was actually punching himself in the head. Marvin Hagler came up from the School of Hard Knocks, 8th Street Gym. And nothing was given to Marvin. Marvin appreciated everything that he had. And when you look at a man who you're trying to intimidate, it wouldn't be Marvin Hagler. He had the bald head, but he had a heart of steel. And when he climbed in the ropes, 1985, with Thomas the Hitman Hearns, he had a mission. He was going to take it right to Thomas Hearns. And you can tell he had a mission because when Thomas Hearns hit him with a straight right hand, he didn't back up. He continued with the mission. And he made Thomas Hearns fight him. That's the kind of man Marvin Hagler was. The first time I ever saw Marvin Hagler was in Philadelphia when he fought Benny Briscoe, 1978. It was at the Philadelphia, it was at the Spectrum. And Marvin Hagler showed me something then as a young man. Because Benny Briscoe, they called him Bad Benny Briscoe, he was no pushover. He had a draw with Carlos Monzon in Argentina. He could fight. And when that fight was over, the first thing he did was pull the microphone down and called out Ronnie Harris. That showed me what kind of man he really was. He just didn't get the right breaks, as did Larry Holmes. And it's funny, they both started their careers in 1973. But Marvin Hagler was a hell of a fighter and person. But when that bell rang, if you wasn't prepared for him, fight was over. Unbelievable fighter was Marvin Hagler.
Thank you for that, Scrapbook. Kurt, can you give us something on Thomas Hearns and the intimidator that he was as he rose through divisions in the sport, the hitman?
Yeah, as an amateur, Tommy Hearns only had 7 knockouts, to the surprise of many. You know, the right hand was perfected by the great Emanuel Stewart. And when he started to perfect the right hand, even Emanuel Stewart said in a Kronk, he wasn't the most naturally gifted fighter, but he was the most determined fighter. He just kept getting better and better and better. And people forget that Tommy Hearns is an incredible technical boxer. He fought a guy by the name of Ernie Singletary, where he just went in there and boxed because he knew he could knock everybody out. Harold Weston Jr. and Ernie Singletary, Luigi Manquillo, fighters like that, he had to box. A certain night, you just ain't gonna, you get hit with your best shot for some reason, they just stand there. Leonard was the only fighter that Tommy, had trouble with. Between both of them, the biggest thing was Leonard intestinal fortitude. But what I meant to say was that Leonard could never outbox Tommy Hearns. He can outbox Benitez, Duran, and Hagler, but not Tommy Hearns. Tommy, lack of experience, lost him that fight. If he would have beat Leonard, he would have been on a higher plateau. And we'd have been talking about Tommy in a different light. But you got to remember, he was only 22. And he was a welterweight. I believe he came in the fight at 145 and a quarter. I thought it was too light. He was 32-0 with 30 knockouts. And people was talking about his right hand, vaunted right hand. But he outboxed Leonard in that fight. But Leonard, will to win, won him the fight. They fought again years later. I thought Hearns won. Everybody thought Hearns won because he knocked Leonard down twice. He outboxed Leonard thoroughly this time, and they called it a draw. Tommy don't get the recognition. Him and Larry Holmes were two of the most underrated fighters because they was in the shadow. You know, Holmes, Ali, and Tyson between those fighters. And Hearns was Leonard. You know, but Tommy Hearns, one of my favorite fighters. What he did to Cuevas, Duran, James Schuler, Juan Domingo, I think I said Rodan already. But Schuler, Duran, Cuevas, and other fighters. Hearns is not, when they say who's the most brutal knockout artist, you got to factor in he was knocking out A-level competition. Just look at the Duran knockout, one of the most devastating knockouts you would ever see. And Duran was a special fighter. And he made Duran look like nothing. Same with Cuevas. The first WBO champion ever, first 4- and 5-time world champion ever. Tommy Hearns was a great special fighter, man.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, absolutely right, Curtis. I remember Thomas Hearns. He's the only one to defeat. In fact, he's the first one to defeat Virgil Hill when he took the WBA light heavyweight championship belt from him. That was shocking. But when Thomas Hearns walked into the gym and Emmanuel put him to spar, his nose broke right away. And he straightened his nose out and went back in there. That shows the testament of Thomas Hearns. Thomas Hearns was... He was a different person. He didn't have punching power as an amateur, but he perfected it as a professional. Emmanuel Stewart needs to be thankful for that. He needs to thank Emmanuel Stewart, I should say, for that. R.I.P. to him. But Thomas Hearns was some fighter. He's very underrated, and it's very sad. But he was one of the hardest punchers in that welterweight division. And he's very smart as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to say he becomes welterweight champion by beating Cuevas. He becomes junior middleweight champion by beating Benitez. You know. Then he beats Dennis Andrews, light heavyweight champion. Becomes that. Drop back down to middleweight, beat Rodan. Then he becomes super middleweight champion by beating Kitchen, and then he beats Virgil Hill. It's a great fighter right there. To go through weights and beat, A-level fighters says a lot. Is a great Tommy Hearns.
Absolutely, Kurt. And those A-level fighters weren't equivalent to what they would try to tell us are A-level fighters of today, because each one of those fighters that he beat had legacy behind them and had a position in the sport that was well respected. That should be notated as well, because it wasn't like he just got another title. It wasn't like it was all these titles of today that are able to be, passed around like Tic Tacs. But it was, it was a task to go up. And Virgil Hill was the man at 175 when he went up there. And watching him hit Virgil Hill with those right hands, I believe Virgil never knew he had the type of chin he did, because he was very fleet of foot and he moved a lot and everything. But I'm quite certain that, hindsight being 2020, he's glad he did, because Tommy hit him with some good right hands, but Virgil could take it. But he beat Virgil still. That right hand, for him to go through the weight classes that he did and still be able to maintain and carry that power, it is unconscionable what that meant to when he was hitting those guys at the lower weights before he reached that peak weight of 175. I know he fought at cruiserweight too, but I'm not counting that. But when he went all the way up to 175 with that type of punching power, what could you say about that? Just amazing strength and technical execution, because it was also the way he threw it mechanically. He got the most out of what he brought, and he had developed other aspects of his game, punching arsenal, to be able to still utilize that punch and be so effective with it. What else can you share with us, Kurt, on that about Tommy with that right hand and why he was such an intimidating fighter as a result of it?
Well, Tommy Hearns, the way he set up his punches, people knew about the right hand, but he had a devastating left hook to the body. He can box. He had a beautiful jab. You can ask Ray Leonard about the jab that detached his retina. You know, from welterweight to cruiserweight, knocking people out devastating fashion, that's unheard of. You know, so when you have punchers that have balance, precision, and technique like a Tommy Hearns or Joe Louis, they're a marvel to watch. You know, you could just watch their highlight film and just sit back and be like, wow, man, you got to be some fighter. You could watch James Schuler was a decorated amateur from Philly. He was undefeated. And people were saying how Schuler was going to beat Hearns because Tommy Hearns moved up the middleweight. I believe it was for the USBA or if not, NABF middleweight title on the undercard of Hagler Mugabe. And Tommy was setting him up with left hook to the body. And when he was in range, Tommy threw a right hand. Schuler, hands was up. Pinpoint accuracy. He hit Schuler right between the gloves, right on the sweet spot, as we call it in the gym, right on the chin, and knocked Schuler out. And in classic fashion, James Schuler died tragically. But Tommy Hearns took the regional title and put it in his coffin. Classy move, man. Classy move. You know, and Tommy, man, you'll never see another Tommy Hearns that can box like that and that can punch. Devastating puncher. He had a problem with aggressive fighters like Barkley, Hagler, Leonard when they got aggressive. But nonetheless, man, a beautiful fighter to watch, Tommy.
Scrapbook, do you have something to offer on Tommy before we move forward on this?
Yeah, Thomas Hearns. I was at that fight, the Marvin Hagler Mugabe fight. And when Thomas Hearns knocked out Schuler, a lot of people forget Schuler was a decorated amateur. One of the best amateurs we had, black and gold Schuler. And I remember when he took the NABF middleweight championship belt. He took it away from a man who was another decorated amateur, Sugar Ray Seals. And that was something else, man. That was something else. To see what Thomas Hearns did to Schuler. He was an aggressive Philadelphia fighter, but he was a very good boxer. And he set him up. Happened all in one round. You can see him setting him up. And he got him to lower his guard and split his guard and went right straight through the middle. And Gaby Canizales had knocked out Richard Salvador. Richard Salvador took the championship belt away from Jeff Chandler. And when he knocked out Salvador, Salvador had to go to the hospital. When Hearns knocked out Sandoval, yeah, excuse my mispronunciation. When Hearns knocked out Schuler, we thought he had to go to the hospital. It was that kind of a night. And it started raining in Vegas that evening. But I got to tell you, man, Thomas Hearns could punch. He could punch. He's very underrated, and I'm sad to know that, but I have him ranked very high. He was a very, very stand-up fighter, was Thomas Hearns.
Yes, sir. You know, this is really something that I don't want to put it on the two guys that had similar circumstances of where they came from into the sport of boxing. But we have two fighters on our collage that came out of the prison system and being tremendous fighters who have gone down in the history of boxing and are fighters who really brought it during their careers. And the two fighters, Ron Lyle and Dwight Muhammad Cowie, formerly Dwight Braxton. Would you guys like to add what you would like to on these two men being intimidating forces in the sport during their careers and for the reasons that they were. Kurt, I'll go with you first.
Yeah, I'm gonna start with Dwight Muhammad Kwawi. You know, here's a guy, weird built, short guy, very good pressure fighter, had long arms, had an underrated jab. You know, look at the fight with Holyfield, the first fight when Holyfield took his title. That's one of the best cruiserweight fights ever. You know, Dwight Muhammad Kwawi knocked out Mike Rossman, a tough Jewish fighter. You know, he knocked out, it was at the end of his career. Dwight Braxton was a very good fighter, good defense, man. Used to get under punches as well as anybody. You know, wear you down, body, head, body. So he was intimidating because he used to do weird things in the ring, like when you missed the 3 or 4 punch combination, he'd come up with his hands down and have this weird, sinister grin on his face. You know, I remember when he knocked out Leon Spinks. Every time he hit Spinks, that curly kick would shake. You know, so I remember that, and I used to laugh. But Dwight Muhammad Kwawi was intimidating because punish you, then get you out of there. You know, and another fighter, Ron Lau, served several years in prison. You know, Foreman fight. I call that the elevator fight because they was up and down. Lau would have been champion, but he just came along at the wrong time. You know, he fought killers, man. You know, Ernie Shavers and Ron Lau, you could watch that fight. That's a terrific fight. So he was involved in 2 great heavyweight fights. You know, a war of attrition. You know, for Ali. So Ron Lau is one of those heavyweights that, even though he was a champion, you know, you respected him.
Scrap.
Yeah, Dwight Braxton. I was at the fight when he fought Michael Spinks at Atlantic City. I cut school for that fight.
Oh, okay.
Something else. He's something else. Because Michael Spinks was giving it to him. But he was giving it back to Michael Spinks. That was some fight. I was at the Holyfield fight in Atlanta, Georgia. That was some fight. And Braxton, Kawi. Dwight Kawi was some fighter, man. He's another man that's underrated. He came up through the old school ranks. And you had to take him out in order to stop. Ron Lyle, 10 years in Colorado State Prison. That's where he learned to box. And he showed me a lot in that Foreman fight. He showed me what he had. But Dwight Kawi, he was the sparring partner for a really menacing fighter in prison. His name was James Scott. He was out of Newark, New Jersey. And he wound up making something out of himself. He was the toughest sparring partner that James Scott had. And I remember when, watching when James Scott had defeated Eddie Mustafa Muhammad in prison. It was in 1978. And you know who prepared him for that? Braxton. So he can't be overlooked. Dwight Braxton. He was a hell of a fighter. He really was.
There's another fighter that we have. And thank you, brothers, for giving us that bit of background on those two fighters, because, they are a part of the history of the sport, and they are a part of that intimidating factor of the sport, where their presences were known when they were in there with champions and contenders alike. And they gave as good as they got. I mean, the Foreman-Lyle fight was a tremendous affair. The Holyfield Cowie fight was a tremendous affair. Even though Cowie was getting to be a little bit long in the tooth, as they would say in the sport, he still, that first fight, he and Holyfield battled for 15 rounds, and it was Holyfield's 12th professional fight against a killer like Cowie, who actually, if I'm not mistaken, you brothers can correct me on this, when he started out, they were letting him out of prison to fight on TV, or they were televising one of his fights or a couple of his fights from prison. Am I correct in that?
That's true. To this day, I still talk to his brother, so you're right about that. They used to televise his fights live from Rahway State Prison.
Yeah, and you think about it today, it's like there's not a fighter out there today that can get a deal like that. So we were living in a different time, place, space, but also he was a special enough fighter that they could grant that type of privilege to. That's amazing. I wanted to go and ask you brothers about a couple of more fighters that are on our list here. Let's go with Gerald McClellan, who out of the Kronk gym originally fought at middleweight and then had moved up to super middleweight. But for the duration that he fought, he was one hell of an intimidating fighter who would get these amazing knockouts in short time because he was very heavy-handed, had a wide frame for middleweight. He probably would have grown into a light heavyweight eventually. But what are you brothers both recollections of Gerald McClellan and the intimidation that he brought to the sport? Scrapbook, can you go first?
You go first. So Gerald McClellan, like you say, he was out of the Kronk gym. He used to spar with James Toney. He was a devastating puncher. A devastating puncher. Julian Jackson, till this day, is credited as one of the hardest punchers in boxing history. But Gerald McClellan, what he did to Jackson goes to show you that he was nothing to play with. He was a very hard puncher, very intimidating in that way. And when you spoke with him, he didn't have that menacing look. But when he got in the ring, he would take your lights out. Because he punched through you. He didn't punch at you, he punched through you. And he was committed every time he threw a punch. He was willing to get hit back if need be, but he didn't believe he was going to miss the punch. He targeted on you and he threw the punch and tried to throw it through the back of your head. It was one of the most devastating punches I've ever seen with Gerald McClellan.
Yeah, absolutely. Gerald McClellan once scored an 8-second knockout in 1993 in Puerto Rico, against a guy named Tom Bell. Left hook to the body, and that was it. I heard he was a mean dude out the ring, used to fight dogs. That's what I heard. I don't know how true. Allegedly, he taped the dog's mouth up and let the other dogs kill him. I used to hear about Gerald McClellan. I would love to see him and Roy Jones. That would have been a very interesting fight. But McClellan, he was a very aggressive fighter. He knew the power he possessed, and he had that mean cross-eyed stare. And he used to come in with the song, Dr. Dre and Snoop, ain't nothing but a G thing that I used to love. I just love seeing him fight and knocking people out, man. He was just a devastating fighter. He was one of those guys who you wouldn't want to play around in the street. He fought like that in a ring. And that's who Gerald McClellan was, man. Had, highlight reel knockouts. They were quick. They were devastating. Look what he did to Jackson twice. So I would have loved to see him and Roy Jones fought. Gerald McClellan, brutal fighter. He was what you call a brutal fighter.
How many fighters? I'm sorry. I know you want to go, Scrap. I just want to throw this out there and you could go ahead and say, how many fighters did Gerald McClellan knock out with that devastating left to the body? Because he would throw like that 1-2 and then that 3, that hook to the body. And man, he cleaned up a lot of fighters with that third punch. You know, just putting it out there, like that was amazing. It was a thing of beauty. When he would land that shot, you knew the fight was over. And he got Julian Jackson in their first fight with that.
Well, yeah, that's one of the things with McClellan. The proper way to throw a body punch is actually up. You punch up in the ribs. And that's how he used to throw his punches. That's why they were so devastating, besides his power. But I wanted to ask you guys, who do you think was a harder puncher? Julian Jackson or John McClellan?
Can we ask for what weight? Because that was a difference.
No, that's correct. Middleweight.
Okay. At middleweight, I give the edge to Gerald McClellan because Julian Jackson was really a junior middleweight. He fought at middleweight, but he was really a junior middleweight, and that's where the getting was good. But just like Terry Norris was a junior middleweight, that's what Julian was as well. But Julian threw his punches. He threw everything hard. That's why you could catch him, because he threw everything hard and he never, it was kind of like a Tommy Morrison thing. When he would get weary later in fights or in the middle rounds, that's you can get him because he'd be tired from throwing everything so devastatingly hard, because he could actually punch through a guy's guard and still get him, still get those Harold Graham type knockouts and stuff like that. But G-Man, if he hit you clean, you go. It's like his power. He didn't look like it was almost like a Tommy Hearns type thing, although Tommy was a little more muscular, but Gerald was just kind of like thin and reedy. And he when he hit you with those shots, I think even Emmanuel Stewart had mentioned that Gerald's punching power was more devastating than Tommy's.
So the next question would be, who do you think was the more intimidating fighter? And this time is their prospective weight class. So if Julian Jackson's weight division naturally was junior middleweight, we'll keep him in that division, and we'll keep McClellan in his division of middleweight. Who do you think was the most intimidating fighter in their prospective weight division?
Gerald McClellan for me, hands down. And my reason for thinking that is because he could close the door on any fighter. Julian could be outboxed, which was proven with the Mike McCallum and how Terry Norris started the fight out against him, but he didn't finish it that way. Julian could be outboxed, and at a certain point, you could tame him if you had boxing ability. But Gerald McClellan, it didn't matter if you could box well. You had to, like they say about Deontay Wilder, be on point for the whole 12 rounds, because Gerald could get you out of there. He could either hit you on the chin or you end up catching one of those body shots from him. Very dangerous fighter for Gerald McClellan was. And I do believe because of the tragic end to his career is why he's not talked about as much. But if you go back and watch the films of his fights, it's clearly evident that that man was a destruct and destroy type fighter. As you know, we remember Hagler using that term. But Gerald McClellan was, I think, a very intimidating fighter, a fighter you had to really watch out for, and he could get you with either hand. His right hand could put you to sleep. That left hook could put you down on the canvas.
Okay, what's your opinion, Curtis?
I'll have to go with Gerald McClellan, man, because he hit his punches better than Julian Jackson. You know, I like, excuse me, I like punchers who can hide their punches rather than a raw power like they just had raw power. But fighters like Hearns and McClellan, they hit their punches, man, and they threw them technically better, you know, shifting their weight and so on. You know, I've just seen McClellan stretch people. So I have to say McClellan was the more devastating, intimidating factor. It was just something about him, man, you know, that was just scary. You know, so I would say McClellan. You know.
I have to say I agree 100% with both of you guys. And that's one of the reasons why Mike Tyson was so feared. Because that's exactly what Mike Tyson did. He hit his punches. It was very short. He came up very fast with his punches, and you didn't see the punch coming. You knew it was there, but you couldn't prepare yourself for it. And that's one of the things that intimidates people as well. A man that stands in front of you, and he has the ability to get his punches off where you can't see him. And you're afraid of the fact that if you miss time a punch, you're out. And there was a lot of good fighters like that. Ray Robinson was an example of what you just said, Curtis, and Stormy.
And also to add to what you're saying there, Scrapbook, Mike Tyson had middleweight like hand speed. And when he was at his best, he put his punches together, and he was a very sharp puncher. So his punches would come off in succession. They would follow one another in a manner of which when he released them in combination, you couldn't block them all. And that's what was so devastating and effective with him. When he put those punches together, guys could not stop him. And if you look at the knockout when he got with Pinklin Thomas, if you look at the knockout he got with Trevor Berbick, when he fought guys, you know, where he let those hands go, Jose Ribalta, those kind of guys, he was able to put those punches together in succession. And sometimes he would double a shot up, like he'll throw a double left hook and then a right hand, or he'll throw a right hand to the body and an uppercut behind it, followed by a left hook. He had these combinations that he would put together where he put his punches together in succession, and something would get through. And that's what would open up vulnerabilities to his opponents. As he got later in his career, he would load up and just throw big shots, and he was no longer doing. You could see a big shot. You could see when a fighter is loading up or getting ready, tensing up. You could see his chest tightening or flexing when a guy is getting ready to load up with something. But before, when Mike was just letting his hands go, that's when he was at his most devastating.
That's correct. He fought a fighter by the name of Mike Jamison. And the combination and how he set that up was beautiful. And I think that's one of the problems a lot of fighters had in conjunction of what you're saying. How he was able to put his punches together in succession where you couldn't stop them and you couldn't even see most of them. And you knew one of them were going to hit you. It was just a matter of putting yourself in a position to find a safe place to fall, because you knew eventually he was going to get to you.
Absolutely. What do you think, Kurt?
Yeah, Mike Tyson was at his best when he put punches together. He worked the body, head, body, but, you know, it was the body punches that set everything up. You know, Tyson from 85 to 88 was at his best when he fought Tony Tubbs. He used to slip punches, and then, you know, he had a beautiful left hook. A lot of people don't talk about it, but it was devastating when he hit Tubbs with it, you know. But Mike Tyson, you know, I used to like when he used to go to the body, you know, when he used to like break people down, because when they asked Holmes who was the harder puncher, he said Shavers by far. But Mike Tyson was a very sharp puncher, very sharp. You know, and Larry Holmes said the same thing. So that was Mike at his best during those prime years when he used to go to the body, then bring the punches up to the head. That's what he was best at.
Exactly. I'm going to tell everybody what a sharp punch is, what it actually means. A sharp punch is when you throw a punch and your shoulder snaps. When you're able to snap the shoulder off of the thrust of a punch, that's a sharp punch. That is the most wicked punch you can get hit with. When a man can throw a punch and he snaps his shoulder, that's a devastating punch. Stormy, am I correct on that?
Yes, sir. Matter of fact, it was that body punch where his shoulder snapped that he hit Michael Spinks with the body shot that originally put Spinks down on one knee. that was the shot. Some people talk about the cleanup shot that finished Spinks off, that uppercut. That was a foregone conclusion, but Spinks was not totally recovered from that body shot. He got up to finish trying to fight, but he was done at that point because you saw the look of resignation on his face. You'd never seen that look on Spinks's face before. You know, people talk about how he looked when he walked to the ring and everything before the ring announcements and all of that. But once the bell rang, he was who he was. He's a fighter, so he's in there to fight. But when Mike hit him with that body shot that put him on the canvas, when they showed the replay and the slow motion, the body shot that hit Spinks, the right to the body that dropped him to his knee, Mike had that total snap in his shoulder. You could see the body punch. And it was a perfect example of what Scrapbook just explained. And in the post-fight, where they did a replay a week later, it's like Kevin Rooney was talking about it in the studio because he said that he trained Mike to throw his punches with a certain snap, and you have to see the shoulder. And that's exactly what he was talking about.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely correct. You had fighters who knew how to throw punches in a certain way where they put you in a position where you couldn't hit them back. And guys like Ali were masters at. Ray Robinson were masters at that. Manny Pacquiao is a master at that. Floyd Mayweather is a master at that. You have a lot of great fighters out there, man, in their own eras who knew how to do certain things to offset a man. But that is a devastating approach. When you can put a man in a position and he's not prepared to throw a punch back at you, and you hit him clean, that's wicked. I mean, you can't ask for a better fighter than that.
Yes, sir. Let's mention this little guy, 140-pound champion, El Campeon, Julio Cesar Chavez, who during his career was able to take on a number of top-notch fighters, but was able to win majority of those fights by breaking guys down with a fearsome body attack. He was able to take one hell of a shot on his chin, and he always seemed to be moving forward. Now, yes, we knew we had a couple of brothers that dealt with him very well, but in talking about a fighter with a huge intimidating presence for a duration of his career, Chavez had that. What do you have to offer on Chavez and his effectiveness as an intimidator at the weight classes he fought, Kurt, and then Scrap?
Well, Chavez, one of the greatest Mexican fighters ever. For that matter, one of the greatest fighters ever. You know, I followed his career before he came to America. You know, he beat Mario Martinez. I used to watch Spanish TV for boxing. He came over here. Excuse me. Made his debut. You know, knocked out Roger Mayweather. Rest in peace. You know, he was great against BNC-level opposition. Johnny Duplessis, Lightning Lonnie Smith, Rodolfo Aguilar. You know, people like that. He's a break people down. He was a great pressure fighter. But one thing I didn't like when you got the best of him, he, you know, complained. You know, he never gave a fighter credit. He never gave Pernell Whitaker credit or Frankie Randall. You know, a hell of a fighter, man. You know, and like I said, BEC level competition, his best night to me is when he beat Edwin Chapo Rosario. He was great that night. He broke Rosario down beautifully to the body, head, you know, had him against the ropes. He worked at both sides of his body. You know, he's a concentrate on the body, you know, and he was a great fighter, man. You know, I just got a problem with him. His attitude, you know, he never gave fighters credit when they got the best of him. He couldn't beat boxers, but, you know, there's not a perfect fighter. So, you know, Chavez, great fighter, man. one of the top 5 Mexican fighters ever. I have a lot of his fights. I used to love when he used to come to fighters and break them down like he did Mildred Taylor. He was very fortunate to win. But, Taylor fought stupid. He made it happen. He put Taylor in the hospital. Taylor was never the same. You had to box Chavez. You couldn't stand in front of him, or else he was going to break you down to the body and then to the head.
Oh, great breakdown, Curtis. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I was at that fight with Rosario and Chavez, and it's funny because Mike Tyson was in the corner of Rosario because his management team had Rosario as well, and he was carrying the bucket for him. But Chavez looked brilliant against Edwin Rosario. They got to a point where you didn't realize how hard of a puncher Rosario was. Rosario was a devastating puncher. But Chavez was old school on him. He got him against the ropes, and he would punch him on both sides to the body. He just kept breaking him down, breaking his arms down, his shoulders down, his body down. Then he'd come up to the head, and then he would come in angles. He would come in from the left side, then he would go to the right side at an angle. And he didn't let up. He never stopped throwing punches. That was the most brilliant fight that I've seen Chavez fight, that Rosario fight. Chavez was a very, very good fighter. He had a lot of heart, and he didn't want to, stop punching. But Curtis is right. He was a complainer if he didn't get his way. That's why he quit in the ring with Oscar De La Hoya. He got a headbutt, and he was, as my brother Curtis says, he was leading the witness. He would go to the fight doctor, and he would point out the fact that he can't see, or something like that. But other than that, he was a very good fighter. Chavez was one of the, he was an outstanding fighter. What can I say?
It's funny that Kurt already gave the ultimate breakdown about some of these intimidators, right? When he said early in our show that these guys usually found a way to quit or something. Isn't that amazing that we've seen the wheel turn around against a lot of these intimidating fighters, that they quit at some point? Not all of them, but the majority of them, you could actually say. Even Arguello quit against Aaron Pryor, So it's like, what is that to say about these intimidators? Are we not to be intimidated at the end of days?
That's why you give credit to fighters like Thomas Hearns. You give credit to fighters like Ray Leonard and Ray Robinson and Joe Louis and, Timothy Bradley and guys like that, because you want to know what's inside the man when he's hurt. That's why you can't judge his career until his career is over, because at some point you have to see what happens when he's on the short end of the stick, when he can't get up and he's fighting to get up, and he could get up, but he doesn't have enough in him to try to make it up. And when he does finally get up, what does he do? And that intimidating factor will exploit a lot of who you really are. It really will. And that's why it's a great subject, because a lot of these tough guys are not really tough guys. Like I said, it's a facade. They're hiding what's really on the inside. And it takes someone who has the same attitude that they have to exploit it. And when they see someone like that, they go across the street. They don't want to confront them because they know that they're going to have to do something. Everybody's watching. But do I really have the arsenal to solve this problem? And they know that they don't. So intimidating is very important if you know how to use it. But if you don't, it's going to exploit it.
Well, like I said months ago, fighters are the greatest liars. But see, boxing will not allow you to become a liar, because what it does, boxing, it's not like football or baseball. See, a quarterback can hide behind his offensive line, like a Troy Aikman, hide behind a great running back, like a Emmitt Smith. A pitcher can hide behind a great offense. Basketball players too, they can hide behind each other. But in boxing, there's no hiding. You're going to have to show yourself. Boxing will make you strip off your trunks, your jock strap analogy, people, and make you show yourself, make you become naked, and make you show yourself. And at the end of the day, all that tough guy, all that stuff is cool, but it's about skill set. And I say the smartest fighter, the toughest fighter, is the smartest fighter. When you look at all the smart fighters through history, they always got the best of the intimidating fighters. You know, and that's boxing. I remember watching boxing years ago on HBO, and Jim Lampley was bragging about how tough this guy is. And Emmanuel Stewart interrupted and said, "Yeah, Jim, but one left hook or straight right hand on the chin would change all of that."
I remember that.
That's true. And, you know, boxing is about superb skill. The boxer that can win a variety of ways tends to have the longest career and the most successful career. You know, and the same usual suspects, well, I can name them by eras with the Robinsons and Ali and Leonards and Whitakers and Mayweathers. Those were the guys who had the super skill sets. Those were the intelligent guys. Those were the guys who can beat a variety of styles. That's boxing at its purest form. That's boxing 101. That's why today I have Terence Crawford as the best fighter, because he can win in a variety of ways, you know. And I always like to see fighters win like that. That tells me a lot about them, you know. So we talk about intimidating fighters, but what goes with that is the polar opposite, fighters that can overcome adversity and have a plan A, B, C, D, and E.
Well, that's the whole thing. You can't bring a knife to a gunfight. And if you come in with one weapon and you're in there with another man who has multiple weapons, that's a problem. And what you're saying, you hit the nail right on the head, Curtis. That's exactly right. You will become intimidated because you know you have no more to offer. And the names that I mentioned over and over again, they had that. They can hit you with left hand leads and right hand leads and uppercuts. They can reverse their combinations. Hagler can switch from left to right. So could Crawford. You know, when you have a fighter who can get you in different directions, that's what actually makes you a fighter. You look at Ali in the Foreman fight in '74. He thought on a dime, on a fly. How can I switch up my arsenal? How can I figure out how to intimidate the intimidator? And that's what great fighters do. And that's the reason why I admire those guys, man, because they figured out there's more than one way to beat a man. And sometimes it takes the middle of the action to figure it out. And only the greats can do it.
Yeah, raise your level as the fight go on. You know, you get what you call improvise. That's what Ali did against Foreman. He improvised. You know, and fighters like that, man, that got this think tank that's inside them that you can't teach, man. You know, you got to be born with it. And everybody's not going to be Sugar Ray Robinson. I understand all that. You know, but that's what makes boxing. Then we could talk about different styles and different types of fighters as characters. You know, it goes a lot deeper than boxing. You know, and, you know, you have the Foremans, you had the Alis, you had the Chavezes. Everybody have their own perspective styles. And that's what makes boxing. You know, style make fights. You never know what's going to happen. You know, and that's why, just like you guys, I love the sport of
So who would we say, out of all what we said, out of any weight division, who do we say is the most intimidating fighter so far in boxing history? I say Sonny Liston.
I'll say George Foreman.
I'm thinking. Forgive me. I'm not fading. I'm just thinking because I want to go with a smaller guy. If I go with a smaller guy, it has to be for me Marvin Hagler. If I go with a bigger guy, it has to be either Foreman or Liston. And it's kind of funny with the two because, you know, Foreman came up out of Liston's camp, you know, so he took a lot from Liston. So it probably would be like Scrapbook said, Liston first because that's who George would have adopted a lot from. But I'm leaning mostly toward Hagler because Hagler was such a presence that he would get robbed in certain venues and arenas and things like that, where it's like he was just too good, okay, and he could beat people a variety of ways, like we talk about Larry Holmes, but Hagler being able to switch orthodox and southpaw, that really made it tough because people really didn't want to fight him. So to me, that was a very intimidating factor that people couldn't prepare for a guy who could fight from either side, had technical skill, had a dogged determination, and was always in shape. You could never catch him slipping. That to me is the pinnacle, and to me it has to be Hagler.
Well, to me, it's Foreman because the performance he put on against Joe Frazier and Ken Norton, that shook everything up in the boxing world. That's what made people believe that Ali had no chance of winning. None. Not slim. None. Foreman was 40-0 with 37 knockouts. But like I said earlier, it's not the knockout, it's who you knocked out. I mean, we ain't talking about two muffins here. We talking about Ken Norton and Joe Frazier.
Mandingo.
Yeah, right? Most destructive thing I've never seen a more stronger fighter, you know, a menacing fighter. Before the fight, the scowl he was giving Joe Frazier, the stare, you know, he was like a monster, man. And, you know, what he did to Joe Frazier, you can never forget. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier. How he hit him on the side of the back of the head and he was running and knocked him off his feet. Damn. I mean, it gets no more intimidated than that.
What was he doing? He was running?
Yeah, he was trying to get the hell out of Dodge, man. He hit him in back and boom. Back of the head. It was like a father beating a child, man. Oh, man. Then he knocked Frazier off both his feet. Joe Frazier now. Then what he did, boy, man, that was scary. That was downright scary. I didn't get the full taste of it because I was young. I was, you know, very young. I was like 7, 8 years old. But my father and his friends and my uncle, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. That shook everything up for Foreman was the underdog in that fight. And he beat Frazier like it was nothing. Very intimidating, man. That put George Foreman on monster status.
And Frazier was crazy enough to want a rematch.
Yeah.
Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
but Curtis, you got to remember, Sonny Liston, when he fought Ali in '64, nobody gave Ali a chance, man. Not a shot in hell.
Yeah, they thought Ali was going to be murdered that night too. Although scrapbook, I do recall that a lot of sports writers and everything, they said that when Ali and Liston came face to face for the fighter's instruction at the center of the ring on fight night before round one, they looked at how much bigger Ali was than Liston, and then people began to think, because Liston gave the perception that he was a bigger guy, and his reputation preceded him as such. But, Cassius Clay was 6'3", almost 6'4", and Liston was only 6'2", but appeared to be a lot bigger when he put those towels under his robe and everything across his shoulders, and they saw how much bigger the young man was. So that was, and they never had a face-off, remember? They never had a face-off. They were always standing away from each other and everything, so you never really saw them side by side.
That's true.
But you know what? Ali got the best of him because a bully is afraid of one person, a crazy person. And Ali convinced Sonny Liston that he was crazy. He convinced him. Remember, he used to show up in front of Liston's house late at night. He used to go to, his training camp. Liston really thought he was off. So Ali didn't care. Ali is not the type of guy that's going to be intimidated by anybody. He's too much of a personality. When you have a big personality like that, you're not going to get intimidated. I don't care who it is. Ali fought everybody in different countries. So he wasn't intimidated for Liston. The Liston prime was 57, 58, 59, but, Manuel said that Liston would have beat Ali at that time. I disagree because the style, Liston, worst nightmare was a guy like Ali because at that time, everybody stood in front of you. I don't care if it was Doug Jones or Eddie Machen or Scrap Iron Johnson, people like that. But Ali footwork, when you have footwork like that, man, it's a different level. You can get out the way, you can razzle and dazzle people. It's like having a spear in Kung Fu. The Japanese spear doesn't have a tassel where the Chinese spear has a tassel. The tassel on the spear is to dazzle you, and confuse you. And that's just like, Ali footwork. Ali was hitting them with right leads and hooks and all kinds of punches, man. So it was the speed that really got Liston, and he was like, the hell with all this, I ain't coming out. My shoulder hurt. So that was it.
That's another example of a bully who quits, Curtis. Absolutely right.
Yeah, I'm going to take my football and go home. Y'all ain't playing my football. Y'all ain't pick me, so I ain't playing, so I'm going home. Going home.
Wow. This has been a wonderful discussion, brothers. Once again, you guys have done it, man. This has been a tremendous conversation on intimidating fighters in the sport of boxing. This is a subject also that we can revisit at any time because there's so much lore, and we could go even back deeper into the history of the sport for some earlier fighters who were equally as intimidating as the guys that we presented for the audience this evening. Let us get some final words as we get ready to close things out. Kurt, it's been great having you back, my brother. I appreciate that you were able to pull things to this evening and put in an appearance. We hope that you continue to get better. Go ahead and give us some final thoughts.
Yes, sir. I see people in the chat. Thank you for spending your time with us. This is hardcore, historic boxing talk. None of that mess, all that mumbo and jumbo that the other channels be having, man. This is a sport, man, that we got to uphold tradition and professionalism, man, and we're going to continue to lace you with great content, and great subject matter, and it's good to be back with my brothers, Scrapbook Boxing and Stormy B, man. we are, three the hard way, three wise men of boxing, three musketeers, whatever, however you want to put it. We are true boxing statesmen. And, you don't get expertise like this anymore, and I'm just glad to be back and talk boxing, with everybody, and I'm just glad to be here in the position I'm in, man, where you got, two of the best boxing minds all on YouTube, man, with Stormy B and Scrapbook, man. I'm just glad to be a part of it. And the chat, you guys know your boxing as well, you'll join us. Hopefully you'll join us in our future shows. We got some great stuff coming up.
Hey, Curtis, man, it's a pleasure. A pleasure. I'm very happy you're back, man. We can't do without you, brother. Great show. Stormy, great show, man. I really appreciate it. I want to say shout out to my brother, Drew Titan and Truth Noty, man. They're doing something real big, bring back some of the old fighters and showing them some love, man. And that's what we need in the community. I want to thank everybody in the chat. Lawrence Williams, shout out to you and D-Style and everyone else, man. I really appreciate it. I had a great time tonight. Can't wait for the next show.
Absolutely, man. And my brother, Boxing Conversations with Reggie Owens, with what he's doing out there on his channel, revisiting some of these fights and taking us back down memory lane for various matches that people may not have ever had a chance to see, or fights they've heard us talk about. So he's calling them and presenting them to the audiences for people who haven't had a chance or people who just want to revisit. And I think that's a great thing. I've been telling him and encouraging him to keep it going. Shout out to Lawrence Williams again, for stopping by and giving us some support. D-Style Boxing, Drew Titan, again, what you and Trick Noty are doing and the interviews that you guys are having with these fighters that are no longer active in the sport as far as participating in their career, but they are still around and still there to pass on knowledge, experience, and let us know what the state of their positions are. That's a wonderful thing. And let them know that we still love them for what they did in the sport and everything. And we want to do what we can to try to help turn things around and maybe get these fighters help through, whether it comes through some type of a union or something. We want to get behind that and show support for that. So salute to all the brothers and sisters out there in the community that are doing things to make it work, make the sport come together cohesively. And just because the sport isn't live presently doesn't mean that it's dead. Okay. We are still moving and shaking and doing things and keeping the essence of what the sport means out front. That's important. So, again, this is our new night, Thursday nights at 8 p.m. Central. The three wise men of boxing will be doing our thing here. And for the Stormy B-Man channel, we got Friday night chop session coming tomorrow evening. And Saturday, we have another edition of In the Eye of the Storm, where we're going to have Best Fight the Best, BFTB Boxing, on the show. So we look forward to that, 10 a.m. Central. So, for my panel here, Scrapbook Boxing and Kurt Anderson, we're going to sign off this evening. Hope everybody have a wonderful weekend coming up ahead. Stay safe out there. Take care of your family. And we look to see you again this time next week for the Three Wise Men of Boxing. Want to say peace to everybody. Have a good night.
Peace.
Peace out.
But there was a lot of intrigue in that fight. I thought it was 55-45. But Ray Mercer has one of the best chins you will ever see. He has a granite chin. And that fight, he was taking some shots.
I knew Ray Mercer could take a good punch, but Tommy Morrison's left hook was
something that was a little bit special because, and because there's just, Tommy Morrison fought a lot of the guys on his way up that Mike Tyson fought, and he got a lot of the similar results that Mike Tyson got. So,
that Buddy Bear fight was something else. He had him do a 360. Joe Louis hit him so hard that Buddy Bear did a 360. That's a hard punch. Because Buddy Bear was over 6 feet. Brutal punch, Joe Louis. I mean, his brother Max Bear. Joe Louis hit him with a triple left hook. That ended it for Max Bear. Max Bear could take punches. In fact, Max Bear was said to have been the greatest right-hand puncher as a heavyweight.
But there was a lot of intrigue in that fight. I thought it was 55-45, but Ray Mercer has one of the best chins you will ever see. He has a granite chin. And that fight, he was taking some shots.
I knew Ray Mercer could take a good punch, but Tommy Morrison's left hook was something that was a little bit special because, and I recognized that early on because there's just,